Girl, real talk. This whole "it's a new year, time to reinvent myself" trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
A note to listeners. The following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
David Berkowitz loved to toy with the media. I'm talking about in his early days when he was first apprehended. He wanted to confuse. He wanted to terrorize. He wanted to continue to confound the police. He rocked from side to side in his seat in the courtroom and sang to himself in a low voice, but loud enough for Stacy's mother to hear him. Stacy was a whore. Stacy was a whore.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
Welcome back to The Killing Hour with Doc Bonn. So much has been said about David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam killer. Some of it is true and some of it is false.
Today, Doc Bonn will continue to dispel both the facts and the myths about this killer, who still today captivates people's attention with his manipulation of the New York City press and police during his reign of terror.
We'll also find out about what David Berkowitz is like today and whether or not he has any remorse for his killings. It's time to start The Killing Hour with Doc Bonn.
So we were talking about all his devil worshipping, and there's been a documentary, and there's been some articles about him belonging to a bigger devil cult. Do you believe that is the case? And can you explain to us why people are saying that?
Sure. Again, this is where Berkowitz has, over the years, given mixed information and toyed with the press and toyed with the police. There are times where he has led them to believe that he was part of a group, if it suited his fancy and it amused him at the time. Do I believe that he was part of any sort of a killing group, a killing cult? The answer is absolutely not. And he, again, when we were together, I asked him this question, and he said, in no uncertain terms, I did it myself. And I will tell you that from the standpoint of understanding how serial killers tick, I mentioned the fact that they all have some sort of a fantasy need. That fantasy need is almost like a drumbeat inside of their head that only they can hear. And that is why relatively few serial killers have partners. There certainly have been serial killers who have had partners, the Barbie and Ken killers. But usually where there is a partner, it's a subordinate partner who is there to help fulfill the predominant need or the need of the dominant partner. And so the likelihood of having an entire group of people who are all marching to this same drumbeat internally that they have internally and working collectively to kill people in New York City, very unlikely. Very, very, very likely. If you understand serial killers, it just doesn't make any sense. And so I do not believe that he was part of a killing cult. But again, David Berkowitz loved to toy with the media. I'm talking about in his early days when he was first apprehended. He wanted to confuse. He wanted to terrorize. He wanted to continue to confound the police. So if it amused him to perpetuate a particular myth, whether it be about the dog or whether it be about a killing cult, he would do it. He would do it just in order to give himself something to laugh about.
So you've written about the fact that that Berkowitz claims to be born again Christian, and now
Yes.
he's serving God. So what do you make of that then?
Yeah, well, this goes into the file of truth is truly stranger than fiction. So to give you a little bit of history here. So after Berkowitz, he pled guilty, by the way, and after he was imprisoned, he was sent initially to Attica, which, as you know, is one of the hellholes of the earth in terms of prisons, very frightening place. And early on, he was attacked by another prisoner, similar to Jeffrey Dahmer, as Dahmer was, but unlike Dahmer, he wasn't killed. But his throat was slashed from ear to ear, and he still bears the scar. I saw it. I mean, a jagged scar that had more than 60 stitches to sew his neck back together. A terrible jagged scar. He almost died. And so Berkowitz describes his first 10 years in prison as just being living hell for a number of reasons. One is he still held on to this fantasy, believe it or not, and he told me this when we were together, that Satan would somehow come and unlock his cell door and he would be free. He really believed that having done Satan's good work, that Satan would reward him somehow and would not leave him in prison, but actually, free him. Well, needless to say, that never happened. And fast forward 10 years, and he became just hopeless and helpless, feeling that life had no purpose anymore. And remember, he was still a relatively young man. I mean, even after 10 years in prison, he was only in his mid-30s. So he went to prison very young. And he told me by 1987, which is 10 years after he went to prison, that he reached a point where he was truly suicidal. He said, I was contemplating killing myself because I just couldn't imagine spending another 35 years in prison, and I wouldn't be able to make it. And then he describes call it a moment of clarity, divine intervention. I don't know how you would refer to it, but he said the light of God came into his cell one night and he fell on his knees, and he said that God forgave him. And he said that he went to sleep that night and had his first good night's sleep in decades. And when he woke up the next day, he believed that he had been forgiven for his sins, and that his job for the remainder of the years that he had on earth behind bars was to serve God in whatever capacity he could find. And he has become something of a darling of the evangelical Christian community. I mean, it's almost beyond comprehension, but he's been embraced. He has become something of a symbol, not only in this country, but around the world of redemption. He's written a book that has sold very well. As you know, he calls himself the Son of Hope. He refuses even to acknowledge Son of Sam anymore. He says he's the Son of Hope. And there is a website about him and his, I guess you would call it his ministry, for lack of a better term, that is operated, this website, by a group of evangelical Christians. And you can go to the website. It's ariseandshine.org. That's the website. And literally millions of people around the world have been attracted to his website. And he corresponds with people using an old-fashioned Smith Corona typewriter through letters with people around the world, because he's not allowed to use a computer, but he has this old-fashioned typewriter. And you have people who are terminally ill, cancer patients, people with all sorts of emotional problems and disabilities, who write to him and truly believe that he is somehow a source of hope and comfort for them. And so it's almost beyond imagination. It's almost beyond comprehension, but he seems to believe it. And he maybe, who knows? I'm not in the business of identifying a spiritual awakening. I have a PhD, but I don't have the tools, to identify a born again Christian. But who's to say? Maybe he has found the purpose that he was looking for. Maybe he has found meaning that he was looking for. But that's his story.
Well, that's very interesting. So, wanted to get a little bit about your time with him in prison when you actually sat face to face with him. I've done a lot of face to face interviews with killers in prisons before, and it's like, for me, it's always been the anticipation is like you're kind of lacing up like a bucking bull that you're getting ready for. You're waiting for something to happen, something, earth shattering. What was it like for you sitting across from him after I would imagine you were corresponding with him for a period of time before you got to that point? And,
Absolutely.
And so that lead up to that meeting, that face-to-face meeting after you've been speaking to him through letters, what was it like for you? And then also, what did you get from it, from your experience there, and what did you learn?
I'll just tell you, it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life, the actual afternoon that I spent with him. And but I'll tell you, events leading up to it and so forth. So yeah, as you said, Rob, I had been corresponding with him quite extensively for a couple of years. And although, in his letters, I got this sense of remorse and contrition that he was talking about and how he wants to serve God and so forth. But it's hard to reconcile that with the imagery that we still have of the young David Berkowitz, the surly, angry young David Berkowitz. And so as you said, I was sort of, getting ready for putting my shield up, putting my armor on, because I had no idea exactly what I was expecting. But I was very excited when he actually asked me to come and see him. And I said, absolutely, I'd love to do that. And it was springtime. It was a spring morning, early spring morning, when I went to see him. And he was housed at that time at the Sullivan Correctional Facility up in the Catskills in upstate New York. And let me tell you, it is is made of Israeli sandstone. And it looks like a fortress sitting there in the mist out of a Gothic horror movie. I mean, just the facility of itself gave me the shudders to look at it on that spring morning in the mist up in the mountains. And once I got inside, it was even more frightening. The staff and the administrators. I've been in a number of prisons, as I know, the two of you have, but I'd never been in a place like this before. That it's like the entire demeanor of the place and the staff was designed just to intimidate the hell out of you. And so I was uncomfortable. And then as I was led into the commissary area, waiting for him, I have to admit to being a little bit nervous. And I was armed with a big bag full of quarters. And you may ask, why were you armed with a big bag full of quarters? And the answer is, I was told by an insider there, an administrator, that if you want to get him to talk and you want to spend time with him, bring money, because you can buy food for him out of vending machines. They have both hot and cold vending machines there that vend everything from hot dogs and hamburgers to chips and French fries and pie, cake, you name it. So I took a big old bag full of quarters with me, and lo and behold, after a couple of minutes, in comes, literally bounding, this sort of chubby, middle-aged man with a completely bald head, who had rosy red cheeks and looked very much like a ceramic backyard gnome, like you would have in the backyard. He no longer looked like the sullen, young, angry man. He literally looked like a cherubic backyard gnome. He came bounding across the commissary, literally gave me this huge hug, and immediately demanded that we sit and say the Lord's Prayer before we do anything more. So you can just imagine how taken aback I was, at that point. And he
So wait a minute, real quickly. I just wanted to get your reaction to the hug. How did that make you? That's gotta be friggin' weird. I've never had.
Oh, it was. I
don't think I've ever been hugged. I don't think anybody's ever been hugged by a serial killer before.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely, Rob. It was bizarre. It was bizarre. But the funny thing is that his demeanor and everything about him is so unthreatening now, or non-threatening, that in a strange way, it was okay. I mean, on the one hand, intellectually and mentally, it's like, this is the most bizarre thing in the world. I just got a hug from one of the most, notorious killers of the 20th century. And yet, it wasn't so bad, and this gets to the contradiction of it all. The time that I spent with him was the most comfortable and least threatening of my entire experience in that facility. The guards and the administrators were far more intimidating than him. So it's almost like I was sitting in this little oasis having lunch with the son of Sam. And by the way, his favorite snack food is Cool Ranch Dorito chips. You heard it here first. This is an exclusive. Cool Ranch Dorito chips are his favorite snack food. And I had to buy him several bags because he wanted to make sure to have some to take back to his cell. And so we're sitting here eating our hamburgers and having our chips and our sodas, talking together. And as I said, it felt strangely familiar and comfortable in an unusual way. So this juncture, this contradiction did not escape me. I felt it. I truly felt like I needed to pinch myself, like I'm in bizarro world here. Like I almost needed to ask for a timeout to regroup because it was so strange.
It sounds like it. I mean, I can't imagine sitting across from someone like that and then having those emotions that you were having. It must have been a little overwhelming when you left.
Before I left, I mean, throughout the entire experience, I was there for hours. I had lunch with him. I was there for the better part of the afternoon. I spent between 3 and 4 hours with him that afternoon, and he didn't rush me out. I mean, I eventually, it's like, oh my God, I think I've had enough. I have to go.
Yeah. It's like a lot. It's a lot of energy being directed at you from someone who's done all this stuff.
If I stayed for dinner, I think. I mean, he was not in any rush to get me to go. And the thing that's so fascinating is the range of emotions that he experienced throughout this, and the range of emotions that I experienced. Because I asked him, I said, tell me about your thoughts on your crimes, and do you feel remorse? And he would well up in tears, and they would just come streaming down his cheeks. And he said, I would do anything to take back the things that I have done, but I've had to make peace with the fact that I can't, and so that all that I'm left with is trying to do God's work as best I can. And so one of the things that he does on a practical basis is he's a mobility guide and a spiritual advisor and a reading instructor in the prison. So in other words, he helps his peers. The facility there, Sullivan Correctional Facility, which he's been moved since then to another maximum security facility, but where he was for years and years at Sullivan, also housed, in addition to lifers like himself, individuals with various disabilities and so forth. So he would help, his peers to go to the chapel. He would sit with them and pray with them. He would help them, take them to the cafeteria. He would help them get dressed. I mean, all sorts of things like that. And he felt that he was just, however he could serve his fellows and however he could find a way to be useful is what he wanted to do. Now, I've had many people say to me, well, it's an act, it's just an act. He's doing it for sympathy. He's doing it to maybe get parole, or something like that. Well, that's not going to happen. He will never, ever be paroled. He's 69 years old. He comes up for parole periodically simply because it's the law. He is eligible parole, but it has not happened and it never will happen. And he knows that. And it's not like he gets an extra serving of chocolate pudding on Saturdays because he's helping his fellow inmates or he's writing to cancer patients or something like that. He does it because he says he needs to do it. And this is his meaning and his purpose now. Many people scoff. I myself have my doubts and so forth, skeptical. But I'll tell you this. After the time that I spent with him and seeing his demeanor and his reactions in real time and the tears and he would just shake and the contrition that he would express, if he doesn't believe it, if he truly doesn't believe what he's saying, and it's all fabrication, then he is the Robert De Niro or Daniel Day-Lewis of serial killer actors, because he is very believable in terms of his presentation. And
well, you talked about him being remorseful.
Mm-hmm.
And did he ever reach out to any of the victims' families with that remorse?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, Rob. And the answer is yes. I'm going to tell you a little story, and we're going to have one of my friends in an upcoming episode, Jeff Kamen, who's a award-winning journalist who was actually in court when Berkowitz was in his trial or sentencing, and he's going to provide insights there. But the short answer to your question is his last victim was a young woman by the name of Stacy Moskowitz. That was his final victim. And when Berkowitz was in court, he knew that Stacy Moskowitz's mother and family, as well as the families of other victims, were in the courtroom because they were there to see his sentencing. And Berkowitz was aware that Stacy's mother was literally a few feet behind him, sitting a few feet behind him. And what he did, because at the time he was still this horrible individual who wanted to inflict pain and misery, he rocked from side to side in his seat in the courtroom and sang to himself in a low voice, but loud enough for Stacy's mother to hear him. Stacy was a whore. Stacy was a whore. So this David Berkowitz, now contrast the David Berkowitz after 1987. He actually did get in contact with Stacy Moskowitz's mother, and they began to correspond. And he expressed his tremendous remorse for what he had done to the daughter, but what he had also done to Stacy's mother. There was supposed to be a documentary or some sort of a television interview where they were going to get Stacy's mother and David Berkowitz together to have a meeting, and essentially for him to pass the olive branch and ask for her forgiveness. Unfortunately, the event never took place. Stacy's mother passed away, and it was never able to happen. But what a powerful thing that could have been if that meeting could have actually ever taken place.
Girl, real talk. This whole "it's a new year, time to reinvent myself" trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
Listen to the 48 Hours podcast for shocking murder cases and compelling real-life dramas from one of television's most watched true crime shows. Go behind the scenes of each episode with award-winning CBS News correspondents and producers in Postmortem, a weekly deep dive. Listen to 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, no, we've experienced some of those. We've kind of arranged those as well. Those are between victims' families and killers' families. I can't imagine what that would have been like. The kind of feelings and emotions and I know a lot of it falls under kind of the restorative justice kind of method of thinking, but I think it's a powerful thing if someone can force themselves to go through that fire. I think it has definitely some benefits. We've had experience with people who've had come out of that kind of meeting and became empowered to the point where they're serving their community even more. But
absolutely. And Berkowitz has kind of an apocalyptic view of the world. He sees the world as a very disturbing an evil place, and sort of a very fundamentalist approach, and the only solution is Jesus Christ, and God. That's it. That's the solution. I get that, and I asked him, what is your message? What is your message to the world? And he said, my message is that if God can forgive a wretch like me and give me purpose for my life behind bars, then anyone can be saved. And so I imagine the way he phrases that and the way he presents it is probably the thing that was embraced so much by the evangelical community. But it's absolutely amazing. I have, for my book, Why We Love Serial Killers, I interviewed and talked to a number of the people that he corresponds with, evangelical Christians and ministers and so forth, and they are absolutely convinced that he is the real deal. And these are not stupid people. These are not crazy people, and they deeply believe that Berkowitz is something of a living miracle. And again, I'm trained as a sociologist and a criminologist, so I don't, like I said, I don't have the tools to really evaluate a Christian rebirth, but he certainly is convincing and moving. I mean, I will absolutely say this, and some of our listeners may scoff. They may say, "Oh, you're out of your mind," but it was moving in an unusual way. I left that experience that afternoon feeling very differently than I went in. I wouldn't say that I felt great or that that I had any kind of a rebirth, but it was genuine and it was heartfelt and it was moving in a real living, real-time way.
Well, I think that happens a lot in prison. All the people that I've interviewed, prison killers and stuff like that, a lot of them have turned to God, and it's a way of them, it's self-preservation for them. And it's a way for them to not ignore what they did, but at the same point, they did so much bad in the past, they got to do a lot more good if they're a true believer, to make it to heaven. So yes. It's kind of the penance, all of the tenets of Christianity and born again Christians who believe in that. But I would think he has to, in his mind, maybe he feels like he's got to work double time because of all the bad he's done.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And, there's a couple of ways to look at this. And on the one hand, you can say, let's say it's literal, let's say it's true, let's take him at face value. Then, okay, maybe he has found that finally that purpose that he was looking for. Maybe he had to become a killer in order to find the purpose that he was looking for, and he truly is doing God's good work now and redeeming himself to the best of his ability. On the other hand, you can look at it a little more cynically and say he's simply reinvented himself and given himself a new stage to act on. He's no longer son of Sam, now he's son of hope, and it has given him a bit of a stature, not only in prison but obviously outside prison because of the following that he has, and so maybe he has simply just created a new persona, a new identity that gives him a sense of power and a sense of purpose in his life, but not from the standpoint of being altruistic, but from the standpoint of his ego, and who knows, maybe reality is somewhere in between the two. Maybe it's a combination of the two.
Yeah, no, I think it's a combination of the two. I think he likes the attention because now he gets the attention, like you said to us, and before, like when he's walking around prison, everyone says Brother David. He's getting,
yes.
He gets that. He, like you said, he's rebranded himself, and so he has a whole new audience of people. Now he has nice and good people, God-fearing people who are pulling for him and his quest to be a born again and believe in Jesus Christ. So you have that part, whereas before he was fueled by his horrific acts of killing people and manipulating an entire city of people. So now he's, in a way, he's manipulating him through God.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and as you said, and I agree, it probably is a combination of the two. There's some of it that he may, he truly does believe, and it gives him purpose, and he enjoys helping people. But then there's the ego-based version of it, as well. And I'm glad you mentioned that about Brother Dave, because it's so true. Yeah, that's yet another strange thing. So here I am sitting in the commissary, enjoying our Cool Ranch Dorito chips and a Coca-Cola together with the son of Sam. And these young guys, some of whom weren't even born, when the son of Sam was killing, and they go by and they say, "Brother Dave, how are you, Brother Dave?" And so he is something of a made man, a celebrity there in the facility, and it's just, again, part of this sort of bizarre world that he lives in and that he's created for himself.
At the ending of your meeting, did he give you anything to kind of leave you with? I mean, did you have any kind of token of that meeting that you walked away with?
I sure did. And this goes back into that same file of truth is stranger than fiction. So, after hours together, and I was actually from sitting on this little bench, it's not a very comfortable little table bench where you eat together. I was sore and stiff for sitting there for hours. I stand up, and of course he hugs me again, gives me another hug, and he says, "Before you go, would you like to get a picture together?" And I'm thinking, picture? Okay, sure, why not? Let's have a picture. And almost out of nowhere, this guy shows up with an old-fashioned Polaroid camera, and he leads us to another area, another room, and in this room are hand-painted murals on the various walls in this room. One of them is like a forest setting with a little stream. Another one is a beach setting with swaying palm trees, and the sand. And so Berkowitz looks at me and he says, "So where do you want to take a picture?" And I said, "Well, let's go to the beach, And so he and I are standing together. He embraces me. He puts his arm around me, and the guy takes a Polaroid photograph. So I am now the proud owner of a Polaroid photograph of the son of Sam and me standing together on the beach. It looks like we're on a beach vacation together. And after the picture was taken, I was asked to make a $2 donation to who knows who. I don't know where this money went. It's like a little cult industry they've got here. And then I was led out and left. And I'm walking out, I'm thinking to myself, this is the strangest experience I've ever had. It's like I went to serial killer Disneyland or something, and I left with a parting gift, with my photograph.
That's weird.
Of my beach vacation with the son of Sam.
So
yeah,
bizarre.
I'll tell you, I have no idea that's weird. I can just say that's weird, and I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you have that record of your meeting with him,
Right,
but the fact that someone like a photographer popped out of nowhere, like it was already prepared, and like, all right, it's time to you've met the monster turned into born again. Here's your parting gift.
Yeah, exactly. Like I say, it's like you're on the roller coaster and they take your photograph, at the end of your ride at Disneyland, and then you go home with your picture, your framed picture. It's just, it was really odd. I mean, it took what was already a surreal experience and it just put some more surreal frosting on the cake, if you will.
Bizarre. Okay, last question here, and I'm sure that. It's something that you know about, and I think a lot of people assume, but just for the record, why has he become such an iconic villain in our popular culture? I mean, I know we talked about BTK and why he has, but why David Berkowitz and Son of Sam?
Yeah, well, again, that's a wonderful question, and it really forms the basis for why I wrote my book. Why we love serial killers, the curious appeal of the world's most savage murderers. I'm college professor at that time in the classroom. And when I'm talking to my students, all I have to do is mention the name serial killer, or specifically David Berkowitz. And it's like they've been hit with a cattle prod, electric shock. They just jump out of their chairs. They're so excited. And what I realized, and what I came to realize through my research, is that as a society, we have a tendency to take certain individuals, and there's no better examples than David Berkowitz, Dennis Rader, and Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, and we turn them into these larger than life celebrity monsters that become almost symbols of evil in our culture. And that's why I reached out to David Berkowitz. You know, as I was doing the research for my book, I thought to myself, I want to get the input of fans of true crime. I want to get the input of journalists and law enforcement and psychologists and so forth. But wouldn't it be perfect to get the input of a couple of infamous serial killers themselves who were active in creating their own infamy? And instantly I thought of Berkowitz and Rader. Why? Because they both gave themselves their own brand names. They were actively involved in creating their own legends and their own notoriety, and craved the attention. So I think that is part of the appeal of Berkowitz is the name. Part of it, you know, the son of Sam. It's just it's a name that's just so bizarre and chilling. It's compelling in and of itself. And then when you combine the fact, that name, with the legend and the various strands of the legend, whether it be that he was part of a killing cult, that the nocturnal barking of Harvey the dog made him do it, and Sam Carr being Satan, the next door neighbor, the story and the legend is just so over the top that in and of itself, it's compelling. And then when you combine all of that with the fact that it happened in New York City, the media capital of the world, how could it not become the thing of legend? But he himself, you know, if he had not been so instrumentally involved in his own narrative and seeking that attention, writing to journalists and law enforcement, you know, people like Jimmy Breslin, he was really helping to write his own story. And it's those type of criminals don't come along very often. You know, even among serial killers, if there was a Mount Rushmore of serial killers, you know, the biggest and baddest, he would definitely be one of them. There's no question that, you know, Ted Bundy would be up there, and David Berkowitz would certainly be on the Mount Rushmore of serial killers. Why? Because of all of these factors. It's just so incomprehensible, the story itself, the fact that it, you know, again, New York City as the backdrop, and the fact that he himself was so actively involved in creating the mythology of it all. And also it happened, I think, you know, we need to consider this as well. It happened in the 1970s when serial killers were really becoming part of the popular culture for the first time. You know, up until the 1970s, they didn't even use the term serial killer. Serial killers were lumped together with mass murderers because they just weren't understood. And it wasn't until Bob Ressler coined the term in 1974 of serial killer that terminology was even used. And it was as a result of the behavioral science unit being formed at FBI headquarters in Quantico in 1972 that they began to investigate these individuals. They began to explore and analyze and psychoanalyze these individuals in great detail, because the profilers began to realize that these individuals, like David Berkowitz, kill for very different reasons than anyone else kills. They kill for different reasons than a person who kills one time. You know, the average murder, by the way, is certainly not premeditated and planned in advance. It's usually a result of an argument or a fight, and the motivation is anger. It's not premeditated first-degree murder like a serial killer. And most people, thankfully, don't have this hunger to kill again and again and again. But this wasn't understood. It wasn't understood up until the 1970s. It wasn't until Bob Ressler and John Douglas and others came along to investigate this and really understand serial killers. So he came along. Not only is his story so incredible in and of itself, but he came along at exactly the right time to become the poster boy of it all. And he was, by the way, for those of our listeners who know about the evolution of FBI profiling, the original serial killers who were interviewed in the late 70s and early 80s to form the database that became the foundation of profiling. David Berkowitz was one of the first ones that they interviewed. It was him and Ed Kemper and Bundy, among others. But Berkowitz was absolutely part of the foundation of all that. So in many ways, he is just, in this strange, compelling, small world of serial killers, he is absolutely an OG, if you will. He is an OG of serial killers. He's one of the fundamental players in all of this.
Yeah, no, we agree with you. We agree with you. Well, this has been fascinating. This is a good way to kick off our look at Son of Sam, and we're going to have a lot of great guests coming up on with this that we're going to be talking to, journalists and law enforcement, and potentially some victims who survived David Berkowitz. So we're really excited about diving into the subject matter.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to what Jeff Kamen has to say, since he was literally in the courtroom there with Berkowitz during his sentencing, and also my friend Marlon Hopkins, who was one of the arresting officers. So we got some exciting things coming down the road.
Thank you, Scott.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Until the next Killing Hour with Doc Bonn. Thank you. Next time on Partners in True Crime.
Every serial killer begins as a murderer first time. You have no idea what's coming. No idea. Unless that killer starts sending out notes right away, which is pretty unusual. No, this was just a terrible killing.
Doc Bonn is taking his serial killer expertise on the road this spring in a live theater event. To purchase a ticket to The Psychology of Serial Killers and Why They Captivate Us, go to psychologyofserialkillers.com. That's psychologyofserialkillers.com to find out when Doc Bonn's going to be in your city.
All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content.